Hi.
My name's Laurence.
John Gibson, yeah.
John Gibson, and you're from
Rosington.
Rosington.
Yeah.
So you were in which pit is Rosington served? Was it Rosington? Is there a Rosington pit?
Yeah, Rosington's well, it was roughly 7 miles from Doncaster to the south.
Right.
It's so it's the most southerly pit from Doncaster.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what seam is that on?
It worked the Barnsley and Dunsell seam.
The Barnsley and Dunsell.
Yeah.
So
In some cases it worked singly, or later on it will work as both seams together. Because
what does that mean? So they were in the same ground.
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
had two different strata.
Yeah,
Two different faces.
where the pit was sunk, if you like, it was sunk down to the Barnsley seam, and then the Dunsell was below it. But as you went further away from the pit bottom, the two seams came together. So there may have been 20 feet between them originally, wow. And then it gradually drifted together. So there were only a small dirt band between the two seams.
Jeez.
So you've got basically 5.5 foot, 6 foot of Barnsley, and then 5 foot of Dunsell together combined. So it were.
Does that mean, this is extraordinary, that you've got two mines working on two different seams?
Well, they did work them as individual seams, but as I say, it will combine then, and we've got the equipment in later years to be able to mine not the total seam, but as much as we could extract. So you were looking towards a good, usually about 2.4 metres, somewhere around about that region, but we did try and extract a bit more than that in earlier days, but it weren't successful. But we got that as a successful thing and worked very well.
So the Rosington, I call them the crew, the Rosington crew are working on the Barnsley seam.
Yep.
The Dunsell crew are coming from another mine?
No, they all went down the same shaft.
They went down the same shaft.
There were two shafts, but different levels possibly.
So it's a bit like an elevator, you'd stop at floor 4.
Yeah, although the distance there, you still went out on the same level, but you went to another side of the mine where they were working the Dunsell seam only, but we travelled in a lot of distance before the actual two seams came together that were suitable to work both together with minimal amount of dirt between the two.
So what was so if I'm imagining a crew above another crew, say
they would never be in the same location.
You'd never be above each other.
No, they'd be
miles away.
Yeah, you wouldn't. You get a lot of interaction if you did that.
I'm going to say that was quite a spectacular engineering thought.
Yeah. Obviously, if you work in a coal face, and it's only 5 foot high, but if you can make that 11 foot high, you know, with the right equipment, obviously, you take one cut off the coal face, you get twice as much tonnage. Yeah. You know, so that was the aim, which, as I said, worked quite successful. You've got to appreciate that from going down the shaft at the pit bottom, in later years, we're actually working at the other side of Doncaster Airport.
How far is that?
We used to be working somewhere in the region 8,000, 9,000 metres away from the pit bottom.
9 kilometres?
Yeah, so
we travel by,
so we travel by train.
Underground?
Yeah.
Put underneath the airport?
Yeah. When it was an RAF base, there was a restriction on working coal faces in that area, because particularly when the Vulcans were there, because the hangar doors had to be capable of being opened instantly, if you like, because they were your nuclear deterrent in those days. So if there'd been any subsidence, whatever, that caused them doors not to open, that would be a major problem, obviously. So they restricted the working, but once that restriction had gone, we actually passed under that area and then started working either side out, then open fields above, really. So,
how many metres could a coal face advance in a shift, a day?
In a day? It varied, but when we went on to what they call retreat mining, that did increase, because it were a simpler system, if you like, to really just cut coal, because you'd driven your roadways already and you were actually bringing the coal face back.
Okay, so you were right.
So the restrictions on actually making the roadways by putting steel girder work up, etc., that didn't exist, and you'd gone on to total bolting by then times. So all you technically had to do was cut the coal.
Yeah.
So all the groundwork were done in advance, which was a more profitable option, obviously. But it took a long time to get it into Rosington and actually make it successful with bolting patterns, etc. And there is a time scale to go through of testing, if you like, and the proof of bringing the first coal face fully back successfully without any problems with ground issues, you know, of weight coming on and falls of ground or whatever. So it's quite a long time scale, that.
A lot of investment, really.
Oh yeah, massive, yeah. Whereas advancing faces, you kitted them up as what we would call the out by end, and then you drive them in for a distance until you got to the point that you planned to go to.
Yeah.
So you took all the equipment with you all the time, and then you had to bring it all out when you finished with it. So it were it were a massive changeover, as I said. When you went retreat mining, you drove the roadways, you drove the coal face, and then you installed all the equipment, and then you brought it out. So you had more opportunity to cut coal, and at the end you brought the equipment back. So it was simpler to get back out again to transfer to the next one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what was preferred? Was it? I mean, there's pros and cons to both methods, really. I mean, was it the industry standard to do retreat mining? Was it?
It became so, yes. It was really the bolting that transformed that. The
way you rate a tunnel.
Yeah.
The manufacturer.
How you support, because obviously steel girder work was expensive. And
So when you say bolting, what was different about the way you bolted a retreat mine?
Yeah, well, as I said, there were a lot of testing had to take place, but what happened is that you started off by still setting your steel supports, and then you started to widen them out after a period of successful testing, with bolts in between, and then you gradually went down onto a girder, and you widened out again, but you increase your bolting pattern.
So you increase the bolt, you mean
the number of bolts you put in were more intense then, because you were relying more on the bolt until such time that you got to the bolt only. The bolts effectively then created an invisible beam that was supporting the ground. No, it's difficult.
So let's just go back to the beginning. So you're creating a tunnel, and when you say bolting pattern, you're joining girders together, and the bolts, you're talking about bolts in the joints.
We used to use a plate, and then we had weld mesh on the plate.
Right.
So it was like a predetermined where you were going to put the bolt hole, and that was width of the roadway, and then we put side bolts in as well to stop the coal falling off the sides and hitting people as much as anything, because obviously prior to that we used to set arches and we used to cover them with tin sheets, and then we later went on to weld mesh rings, and of course you had to transport them, whereas a bolt pack came in a pack all strapped up, everything in it with resins and everything.
Because I met even yesterday we had a miner that was the ring setter.
Yeah.
The carrying of the girders down the mines was obviously big.
Yeah.
You know, he was became a tough guy. You know, become very hard. You know, these things
Absolutely,
are heavy.
They were heavy, yeah. Quite frequently, I mean, people would just pick one up and carry it on the shoulder, but not everybody could do that.
Well, it sounds like it's one of those kinds. The body is designed by the job in the end. You know, you keep becoming.
I mean, after saying that, even small guys, because they've got the knack of doing it.
Yeah.
You know, it weren't always about the big guys that could carry one lump. You know, the smaller guys who were quite surprised in how strong they were. Yeah. You know.
What was your job down there then?
Well, I did various jobs because when I started as a mining apprentice, the aim was to train you to work on the coal face. So you were going to go to the best paid job for a workman at the pick point, so to speak. Yep. So you went through all the other jobs leading up to that, and when you became 18 that you actually went on to coalface training, and when you completed all your training, then you were placed on a particular coalface and moved along from there. I did that for a time, and then I went for full coalface training because I went across onto powered supports, actually maintaining powered supports, which is the chocks or whatever.
Chocks,
people,
chocks.
If you know what chocks are, they're the hydraulic powered supports.
Hold the roof up while you're at the face.
Right, absolutely,
and
yeah.
the gob is behind you.
That flushes in.
That flushes in once the props have been removed as you're advancing through the face.
See, that type of mining never changed really. It was still the same, except that you were on, many years ago, they were on wooden props. And then it would go on to steel girders, link bars as they used to call them. People used to have to knock off in the waist, and then it would collapse behind them. Onto, in my time, Dobson props and girders, and then they went off and the first chocks came in, and they just got better and better as time went by.
Because they were talking, I think, yesterday about, I mean, I didn't realise. I think one of the guys was talking about those props took the pressure and actually squashed. And actually they got out of a space after a shift or whatever that was much, much smaller than the one that entered. I didn't even think the props would give. And they were digging the props out of the face to allow the thing to advance, to allow the prop must have been caught somehow in the coal face, is it right? No.
Yeah, I mean, weight could, yeah.
Otherwise you've got
it depends what type it were. I mean, the powered supports, I mean, they set off as 6-leg type things. They dropped to 4 legs, they dropped to 2 legs, various designs of them. And we had the right type of design, powered supports, up to the colliery, or in the period of the colliery finishing. They were absolutely the right choice of power supports, where we'd tried many different ones with a lot of failures over the years, and you know that affected pits closing as well by putting wrong equipment in and insistence on using it rather than saying, well, hey, we've got this wrong and let's change it on the next one, but no, just carry on, you know. And you had a lot of that bombastic type attitude, and
we can't not.
yeah, it had to work, you know, and but it didn't, you know, and everybody suffered through that, you know, whether it were not earning bonuses or whatever because it weren't successful, to the colliery actually losing money, and then under threat of closure, obviously, is because I think I seem to spend most of my life under threat of losing my job.
Really?
Yeah, because I think that's how it was. Although we had massive reserves of coal, you know.
Yeah.
So.
So you started
from 70s, yeah.
What were your dates? So you started.
I started 67.
67. That's when I was born.
Right. Okay. That's good.
You look younger than me.
Just after World Cup.
Were you too? I mean, just after the World Cup. Yeah.
Yeah, 66, wasn't it? So yeah, 67 I started. July 67. So.
That's when I was born.
Yeah.
I was born on the 27th. There wasn't the day you started, was it?
Right. No, it were. In fact, I left school and went and signed on and started on Monday.
Really?
At Markham Main, which was Armthorpe, which was the Doncaster Area Training Centre at the time. And you did 5 days training there that then took you back to the colliery for then 20 days close personal supervision on a surface job.
Right.
Because bear in mind, we were 15 at the time.
Yeah.
Not 16.
Yeah.
And then later on you went back there for different stages of training, 10 weeks underground training, and then 3 weeks I think it were, or 2 weeks, and then there were a pre-call face course. So you know, you kept going back. As I said, you went through the various jobs and then you kept going back.
It was amazing. It was very thorough. It was a very thorough kind of education.
It was good, strangely enough, because we were also at college as well, which was the old college just down the road here, because they had a mining department.
Wow.
And so you could advance yourself in terms of education to move into more supervision roles or even into management roles, which many people did. And so that choice were there. Perhaps the problem was that you'd kind of just sort of got out of school, got into a job, started earning a bit of money.
Going back to college again.
And then going back to college, and your mind might not have been quite ready for that.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps when you got into your 20s, just as you matured a bit more, and that opportunity kind of went, you never got the chance to go back to that then. Whereas my belief is education should be out throughout your life, you know.
Well, see, I mean, I think that's quite an interesting point about education full stop in this country, isn't it? This kind of march onwards to immediately going on to the next course, the next course, the next course, and not actually experiencing life in a sense. And as you say, being ready and receptive.
I mean, the coal bowl were a fantastic industry for people. I mean, they used to take student apprentices that never worked at mines until they had to. They would be at university type schooling and wherever, or colleges, and then they'd go to pits when they needed to do specific training for a period, and they were destined to be management in the future. They still had to do the statutory training, of course, but they wouldn't necessarily get the work experience then. So, but yeah, it was a good system, and it probably was the same with all nationalised industries at that time, although I don't know, but certainly the coal board one was very good. And you had a dedicated training officer back at the colliery, and you know, they moved you through the system, and it was very good.
Yeah.
So I worked for NCB and British Coal, as it later became, up to the colliery closing, which ultimately became...
So were you always on the... Were you a cutter at that point? Or
Oh, no, no.
So what did your career...
I stayed during the British Coal times. I stayed on the powered supports job.
What, power supports?
Yeah, the maintenance of powered supports on the coal face.
So this is all the props?
Well, the chocks.
Chocks, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, the chocks. So that were a full-time job, repairing them, because as they became bigger and more complicated, you had to do further training because electronics came into them as well.
God.
Where you were pressing buttons rather than operating levers or handles, whatever, and they could be set to do different things that, you know.
Really? So they were kind of...
It were automation, really.
So you got a prop that is programmable, so you can increase...
Well, no, because this were a very large chock. If you can imagine, it's got to support the seam of, you know, 2.4 metres high. So this is a very large thing, and a very heavy thing as well, and had to be stripped down to take it into the mine and then rebuilt underground.
Oh God!
And then put onto the coal face, and the coal face was 300 metres long in the end. So, you know, with a machine that it used to travel 300 metres cutting coal off.
That's amazing.
And you'd have these chocks were spaced at 1.5 metres on the panzer, as it were called, and all linked together so that nothing flushed through the back. Occasions that would happen, but particularly when you got broken ground or whatever. But with that type of power support, the ideology was to continue moving, because they were capable of supporting even in broken ground. But you could still get falls between, particularly when you lowered one. But again, through technology, you were actually under the next one and lowering the one at the side of you, rather than the one you were actually under, whereas you used to be under them at one time.
God.
But in lower seams, of course, you'd be laid down or on your knees, doing the same thing. So it varied on the seam height to how difficult that was.
So you were permanently involved in setting up chocks, or were just in the office?
Installation of them, the maintenance of them, and the salvage of them.
It's quite a complicated job, isn't it?
It was, yeah, and it were, though you wasn't technically a fitter, you were classed as semi-skilled, because the fitters, there were that much technology, mechanically and electrically. You got dedicated fitters, but it was too much to look after all that lot as well. And these things were powered by hydraulic pressure that were generated either what they used to call the stage loader, or in later times the pumping station was set up further out, and particularly with retreat mining, because it would pipe down at 5,000 pounds psi. So
what was piped down at 12 miles?
The hydraulic pressure from the pumping station to operate all these chocks.
I didn't even contemplate that.
No.
So you're getting hydraulic pressure down a mile underground from an incredible pumping station.
The pumping station was set up, and you'd have a tank of a preset mixture of essentially water with oil to give you the lubrication so things didn't rust internally. And then that was pumped then via steel pipes at a pressure of 5,000 psi. So to operate these hydraulic, so they all had controls on both mechanical and electrical. But in early days, that pressure was £1,200, and it gradually increased as time went by to give you better support, how you set the chocks, to stop movement of ground and make it a better operation altogether. Which it did, as I say, it moved forward gradually. They did say when the first chocks came in, by the way, that each chock was the price of a mini car.
Really?
Yeah.
How many chocks for a face? Depends on the face.
Well, the coal faces, as technology improved, got longer as well, but the first one I started on was 200 metres, or 200 yards as it was then.
And a chock a yard, is it? Or?
It was at that time, yeah.
So 200 chocks?
Yeah. So that was your job to look after them. And
So-
they used to break and hoses burst and
Yeah. So
so
you
on.
obviously had a service team in the, what do you call it, up the pumping station up top?
No, the pumping station was still underground.
Yeah.
Um,
Underground?
yeah,
Was it?
yeah,
So they built a pumping station underground?
yeah, yeah. For all number of things actually, but the hydraulic pumping station was, in later times, became a automated system that they could start them pumps from the control room and send the pressure to the coal face. So you contact the control room, ask them to turn the pumps on or off, and away you go. Yeah, because you see, the Barnsley team, when I first started, was very limited in terms of the electricity you could use. And again, a gradual process of improvements to equipment and so on, that you could install electricity in what we used to call the return roadways, where potentially gas was present, but with better ventilation and this progressive increase, but to the point where you got massive amounts of electricity and all machinery becoming electricity as opposed to compressed air, which was previously used. So,
If a supply of hydraulic fluid
mhm.
was restricted to the chocks, would safety be compromised, or is there already a set amount of hydraulic fluid in the prop and it's set, and you only pump it in to raise the
the fluid is effectively trapped in the chock, and then there's safety valves in them. If too much weight came on them, they would relieve slightly.
Right.
So there were a lot of safety features built into them. That's not to say I haven't seen legs split,
Really?
that we've had to change in the past or whatever, and bent. But yeah, they had safety features built into them, and once you'd set a chock, it stayed at that pressure unless there was a fault on it. So whether the pumps run or off didn't matter.
But they were there.
It ran when you wanted to operate it again, i.e. lower it down, move it,
Yeah.
that you needed the pressure back on. So I did that job up to the end of British Coal, albeit then in 1987 I actually was elected as a union representative at the colliery.
Was that something you wanted to do?
Yeah, not always. It were, I think my awakening was during the miners' strike in 1984, to be honest with you, where I became more politically active, if you like, afterwards. And that just seemed a natural thing to want to do.
It's amazing, really, when you think about it, that kind of opportunity exists. You're a miner, but you got an opportunity to be pursue your political...
Yeah, one kind of went with other, though, I think, because it pulled you into other things.
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, I was the men's elected representative.
Okay.
So at my colliery, not any wider than that. I weren't a full-time official, although that job later, which I took as branch secretary, was essentially a 5-day-week job.
Really?
The only other thing in it was pit inspections, because we had the right to inspect the mine on behalf of the men with what they call 1, 2, 3 inspectors. And we used to do visits once a week with management and cover all the mine over a period. And we had a report to do under the Mines and Quarries Act that went directly to the Inspector of Mines. So we'd fill one side of the page out and management would respond on the other side to the points that had been raised in the visit. And that were a very responsible thing to have, because also it used to also do inspections after accidents.
Right.
And the worst one that I ever actually had to go was, was two fatalities. So obviously the inspections were a very serious matter, and you needed to take a lot of measurements along with the surveyors and report everything that you'd seen, and meet the HMI later and so on. And obviously it also led into the other part of the role of the claims procedure, and supporting people and so on. But it occurred twice in my time, and obviously it was a very sad thing at the time, and both of them were fairly young men that had been involved, and very traumatic to the people involved as well. But they were the type of accidents then that you got into that involved risk of these large machines and the height of the coal seam as well, because large pieces of coal would fall over, and if you were working in them areas you could be trapped by it, which is in one of them.
Someone was trapped by coal? Yeah,
very large piece of coal, you know, where a person was killed outright. And it had actually knocked over the props what they'd set to protect themselves so they could work on the equipment, and just skittled everything out. There was nothing anybody could do, you know. It were. And then
was it a freak accident or something that you found for?
You could always say you could do better in terms of the prop setting and so on, but you did get these bumps of weight, and then all at once a very large piece of coal would go over and skittle it out, you know.
When you say skittle it out, you mean dislodge the prop? Dislodge
the prop, yeah, so it would continue falling altogether.
So it'd be like an angle that would slowly just...
Yeah, well, I think once it started to go, it'd be very quick, you know, going over.
So when you say a large piece of coal came free, you're talking about maybe something that was sort of, the props can handle a sealed sealing, as it were, but when one's loose, then it's an isolated piece of weight, which is not...
Yeah, it becomes detached in effect, because the roof, the natural roof that we are arising, if you like, for the machines, it were to a natural dirt band, if you like, and then we used to have what we call a flat top above it, which were nice and smooth. But what happened then, you've got that small bookman between the Barnsley seam and the Dunsell, so you've got the potential for that to slip off at any time, but generally it was solid, but then you get weight bumps come on, and it would just displace one lump in one go, and I've seen them 20 foot long, you know. So not something that you could hold back or whatever if it decided to go.
Yeah.
And it were always difficult then of how you supported these areas, you know.
Unstable weight.
Yeah.
So the dynamics of props and it's far more complicated than you'd probably imagine.
Yeah. I mean, you work to things called support roles on coal face, on all these systems. You'd work to transport roles, you know, and you needed to work to those roles very clearly, you know. They were set out to protect you, and but it's also fair to say that not always was the equipment available.
Right.
And one of the problems in mining was that there were this get the job done attitude by people, and risk taking, you know, which needed to be taken out. And though it improved as time went by, you know, it was still there, and the risks were larger really because equipment was bigger. An example of when you were using an hand pick and shovel, there were risks involved, but it were far less than a very large machine operating massive horsepower and so on, that in a confined space. So yeah. That I was elected into that position in 1987, and I went right through to the colliery closure.
Right. So you became the union man?
Well, in effect, yeah, you were available 24 hours a day, or had to be.
And was that something that was... So what would you be available for exactly? What would you be on call for?
Well, things like serious accidents, but disputes.
Right.
staffing disputes or whatever, where you get rung up from the colliery by people that were directly affected, but also by, because management would be contacted as well, and you'd be liaising between the two. Telephone systems got much better underground in them times, where you could actually speak to people underground from my home, if you like.
Yeah.
Not directly, but I could be put through, or they could be put through to me. So I were there as the means of resolving a dispute where possible, and that's part of that thing of being effectively on call 24 hours a day.
And did you have allegiance to one or the other, or were you supposed to be neutral?
Well, you were the men's representative, so they obviously,
Yeah.
you might have seen their argument a different way, or saw a resolvement that was somewhere in between, obviously, on what management wanted to happen, or a lot of the disputes in them periods were about staffing levels, that there weren't enough men to actually run the job what they wanted them to do, or then particularly safety issues if there was something that were not right and they were being insisted that they still work with it, which were somewhat different. So sometimes it led for me to have to get up in the middle of the night and go to work.
Really?
And go underground, or just go to the site and speak further with people, because nobody wanted it to be unresolved effectively, you know. So yeah, that was part of the role. As I said, there was the accident side, because you were classed as the 123 inspector, and you would always be called to what was potentially a major accident or incident. Because the other one I haven't mentioned yet were incidents.
Right.
So anything that were reportable to the Inspector of Mines, again you were called out for that. And that could be a fire, for example, or heating, which we had quite a lot of at Rosington, because the Barnsley seam was a type of seam that did catch fire.
Oh, really?
Not in terms of a massive flame, although that could come later, but it used to sweat and heat up, similar to the haystacks and so on.
Oh yeah, compost. I mean,
Yeah,
manure.
and we knew we had a procedure to follow to work the Barnsley seam, which was in effect facing it off where we'd extracted the coal, and it was like a plaster-like material. We used to call it hard stop, and we used to seal the roadways off to stop air going in to cause that problem. But it still arose from time to time, because you were leaving some coal in the waste, you see. This natural horizon that we worked the coal seam at, we left.
National horizon?
Natural horizon, sorry. That left us something like a foot to 18 inch of coal in the roof, and that was the one that was very much likely to heat up if air were going through to it.
So by cutting the face away underneath it, you would expose it to air?
Yeah, I mean that collapsed with the rock behind the chocks, obviously, but it was the roadway sides that was a problem. But again, when you went on to retreat mining, you reduced that risk of that, because you weren't putting packs on as you used to do in advanced mining, because you used to pack the gob side of the roadway initially to stop weight coming on and flushing through, but also to seal the side of the roadway off, which you didn't need to do in retreat mining.
No.
So there are all sorts of incidents, and if there was an incident, you would be potentially called out for an incident. A locomotive derailed, for example, and that happened because we had diesel locomotives, and then later on we had battery-powered locomotives, and you had all sorts of different types of haulage systems over the years, but essentially it became mostly battery locomotives. And if they were derailed or they stopped other by their own braking system, everything became reportable, and they couldn't be put back on the road until there'd been a site inspection by Orsand, and the surveyors had visited and drawn a plan and looked at the area of what had caused it. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't happen all the time, obviously, but that's the reason that you were available. All number of things like that. And obviously the pit were actually operating, it were mining, and it hadn't got any problems.
Yeah.
I.e. large falls of ground or wherever, stopping a particular coal face running. So it was very similar to, it was pretty much mirrored by what management did,
Yeah.
by contacting the colliery to find out what were happening, if everything were okay, you know. Kind of before you went to bed. Because we used to have a shift which nobody liked, which were a midnight shift. Started at midnight. And that were in British coal days, because we did a 4-shift system at one time, which would at 6 o'clock days, 12 o'clock after, 6 o'clock nights, and 12 o'clock midnight. Nobody liked it because, one, it were very late to go to work, and two, you got in, say 8 o'clock in the morning, 8:30, everybody was starting to be around then and making noise and stopping you, then going to sleep.
Oh God.
So,
I mean, in the street outside.
yeah, because children going to school, whatever, you know. So nights were a difficult one on midnight. It later became 10 o'clock, which was better, because then you got home at sort of 6 o'clock and
Yeah.
or just after, depending where you lived. I mean, I walked round the corner to work, 5 minutes, an hour there.
So shift work full stop is quite a challenge in itself.
It is, yeah. You kind of saw that day shift was early, because when you say you start at 6, you believe in home at 5. That were me, you know, who live nearby, so others would be earlier. And then you've got to get changed.
Yeah.
So you put in your clean clothes into your locker, you're walking through, you're then getting all your underground gear on, and you needed to be underground for 6 o'clock. And then you catch a train underground and travel to your place of work. And so you might not actually get to work till 7 o'clock,
Yeah.
you know, with the travelling time, because though you caught a train to take you the bulk of the way, it didn't take you all of the way. And though transport got better and better as time went along, including riding on conveyors to minimise walking and give more machine time, as it were called, you still had to walk, and you know, maybe it last 1,000 metres or something like that. So yeah, by the time you got there, it might be 7 o'clock in the morning on day shift, for example. But what started to happen in later years, particularly, was that people on night shift would stop overtime and continue cutting coal, and then the day shift, when they arrived, then so you gained an extra hour by a team stopping to cut extra coal, if you like, and then you were picking up from where they left off. The only problem with that sometimes is that the men that were on overtime tended to do the easy bit of cutting the coal and not always leaving it ready for day shift to have a good run, if you want to call it that now, because they had to pick up on all their back work, you know, because there might have been only 3 or 4 stopping, you know, for example. So they'd get the coal off, which were good, but then there was the back work, and then you've got a full team of men on, stood down or catching up on back work and not actually cutting coal, which
So it's self-defeating.
sometimes led to arguments, you know. So yeah, a lot of difficult things really, I suppose, but you know,
Managing
it were,
people,
I wouldn't swap it for tomorrow, you know what I mean? It were a way of life, and I thoroughly enjoyed it right through.
So were you from a mining family?
Not totally, no. My dad worked at the colliery, but my dad came from a farming background.
Oh, right. What, in Yorkshire farming, or?
Well, actually, they were in Nottinghamshire, not too far away, between Bawtry and Gainsborough.
Oh, God, close.
And there were tenant farmers on there, his dad, but they'd moved. I'm still sort of researching their family history, but I think they originated from there, but they went to Sheffield for a time, and they were in the period where horse and carts, obviously, and because there were big horse people at the time, so they did a lot of sort of carting in Sheffield, and then I don't know what happened, because as I say, there's nobody to really ask now. But my dad was born in Sheffield, so at the time they were there. And they went back to to the farmers, tenant farmers, So there were like 5 lads. All
You
lived,
had
all
five,
lived
your
at the,
dad was part member of
and my
five.
dad was one of those, obviously. And they worked that particular farm.